Hello humans, it's Mad Willie, and I recently was watching a video by Ivan Mike 1968 in which he was talking about generic role-playing systems. Uh, it started off as a conversation about Genesys, which is the new one from Fantasy Flight Games, which I definitely like to talk about because it's real pretty. And I've also got a lot of experience playing the Star Wars game, which it is kind of based off of. And I know that a lot of people have been saying that it's essentially Star Wars with the serial numbers filed off, and that's kind of true, but they've also taken the opportunity to refine some things and kind of make it easier for a new GM, new players to really understand what's going on, which I think is important. It's kind of a weird rule system. It's got strange arcane symbols on the dice, and I feel like the first couple of sessions with any new group for Star Wars has mostly, not mostly, but in large part been just kind of slogging through and trying to figure out what do these dice do? What does this mean? And there's a lot of staring and going, this cancels this. This is, what is this one again? No, the other swirly thing. Okay. So the dice system does present some challenges, but I have found in actual play that once people kind of get used to the basic idea of it, it is a lot of fun. And players really love it. They get super pumped. They get super excited with their weird die rolls. What does this mean? How did I fail and get two triumphs and an advantage? What happens? And there's a lot of fun and improv that goes into it, and it's nice to see them kind of reach the point where they're comfortable with that kind of flexibility and strangeness in the storytelling. Now that works really well for Star Wars. You fail forward, you succeed, but then something goes wrong, and I think the best example that anyone's ever told me, and this was actually back in the days of D6 Star Wars, which had a wild die that kind of added a similar element to it. But think about when Lando Calrissian is flying the Millennium Falcon through the second Death Star. He's navigating around and dodging TIE fighters and trying to fit through this narrow space, and he succeeds, but he knocks the radar dish off the top. That is a success with a big pile of threat or a despair, which are two of the mechanics in Genesys / Star Wars. So that is kind of the feel that this game is meant to accomplish. And Ivan Mike raises the question, essentially, when do you use a generic system, and what kind of feel are you attempting to accomplish by using that specific system? Because just because it's generic doesn't mean it fits everything. It's kind of like those one-size-fits-all clothing items that definitely fit some alls better than others. You know what I mean. So Genesys and Star Wars are meant to accomplish that kind of feel, which is fine. That's good. That's what they're good at. But there are also other generic systems out there that accomplish other things and can do some things more successfully than others. One of the big examples is this, Savage Worlds. Got all my little tabs here. But Savage Worlds is, one, it's kind of a big deal in the gaming world. This is one of the more popular generic systems, and it's been around for a while, and it's cheap. This core book costs $10, and it has just about everything you need to play in just about any setting you can think of, so long as you're willing to do a little bit of the work. They also have excellent source books that give you more information, more ideas on how to build your world, and it is a very simple, fast system. It's not my favorite system in the world. There are a couple of design choices that I kind of wonder about, but it does most things really well, and so I keep coming back to it. And the other thing is, it promises to be fast, fun, and furious. I'm not sure if that's actually what they promise. fast and fun at any rate. And it's really good at that. In a lot of games, you can maybe get through 1 or 2 combats a night unless you have really long sessions. Most games, combat is kind of a slog. In Savage Worlds, I've gotten through 4 or 5 easily and still had time for stuff like role-playing, you know, what the game is about. It's quick. Like, it moves really quickly. You don't have to do a lot of math. The die rolls are simple. There's not a ton of, like, comparing arcane symbols or checking, you know, complicated stacks of abilities. It does a really good job. And what it is made to do primarily is pulp, but I've actually found that it is a really excellent horror game system. The numbers are small enough, characters are fragile enough, and you can just tweak things around a little bit to kind of make sure everybody stays scared. And I think that's one of the important things in a horror game, is making sure that danger is dangerous. You get a lot of role-playing games where characters are very highly powered, like original 7th Sea, or higher level Dungeons and Dragons, or mid to high level Star Wars. Characters are very powerful and capable of surviving most things. But this not as much. But there are things that it's not good at. It's not good at giant monster combat. Because it doesn't use something like hit points, and rather you have to pass a toughness threshold to deal damage to something, it gets a little frustrating to fight things that are much larger than human-sized. So vehicular combat also can be a slog. Because there will be turns where you hit extravagantly well, and then nothing happens. You fail to wound. And that's disappointing. I understand that characters aren't always going to succeed. There should be an element of failure. But if you succeed and then nothing happens, that's kind of crappy. But that's not the only good generic system out there. There's also Cipher System, which I have only played with a little bit. I've never run. The rule system itself is not, again, not my favorite. I don't like it even as much as Savage Worlds, but I do love many of the things that they're doing design-wise, exploring new areas, new ways to do games. And honestly, the art is very pretty, and I love the idea of the GM not having to roll any dice during the game. And this game is meant to do certain things better than others. They talk about how it's an emphasis on exploration rather than combat, which, I mean, there's an awful lot of combat abilities, but yes. Well, it's also not about accruing masses of powerful items, or, you know, +1 swords. Most of the magic items in this game, or super-powered items, or whatever they might be, are single-use, which kind of adds a different sort of flavor to how games are supposed to work, and that's what this does well. Okay, so honestly, I could talk about the merits and flaws of various generic systems for possibly forever. I actually really love generic systems, and I find that they're a good way to kind of either help out players who are relatively new to role-playing but have played with you before and not having to switch systems every time you want to pitch them a new game. I think that it's also good for experienced GMs who are just running out of time. If you don't have enough time in your crazy adult life to fit in tons and tons of different things and different types of prep and all of that, just having a couple of generic systems that you can fall back on or that you can put your own custom setting into helps a lot with time management. So I'm actually generally, I'm more pro generic system than I am anti-generic system. Now, there are some beautiful systems out there that are very specific to their genre and setting. Every version of Legend of the Five Rings has been a great example of that. Tons and tons of just cultural info and different ways of doing things that other games don't do. But if I'm being perfectly honest, while I have most L5R books ever printed, I started running it in Savage Worlds. I'm sorry. But it just takes forever to count up the dice. Even though I love the random, the subsystems that they put in to reflect the flavor of the world, the core mechanics, I don't have time for that anymore. So, I can just slot in a couple of those cool things from the game that capture that flavor, and I can slot them into another role playing system. And I think that's the advantage of generics. And I think that that's one of the things that Genesys is going to be really good at. Now, I've taken a look through the book, and this isn't going to be like a flip through video, but I do want to show you a couple of things that are interesting. One, starting with the cover, it's beautiful, but it's also not finished. You'll see that there's this highly detailed area in the center, but as you move out, there's less and less detail in everything. And they've kind of mixed in different settings together, and that is essentially the design philosophy of this book is on the cover of the book and continues throughout. Nearly all the art is unfinished. It looks like somebody's movie design sketchbook or something. There's just so much happening. Like you have this cool robot over here, and you can actually see the perspective lines that the artist put in, and you can see that there's a little bit of color added to kind of give you some idea, but it is a half-finished idea. And that is what this book is for. It's to give you a tool to create what you want to create, not what the game designers have created. And that's kind of nice. Now, the other interesting thing about how they're communicating their design philosophy through art, which I know is a bit of a tangent from what I was originally talking about, but I think it is also important. When you're considering a generic system, what is your design philosophy? How are people going to use this game? Now, when you get into the more setting-specific areas of the book, they actually start to have fully finished art, which is really cool. So here's the opening to the chapter on science fiction. Gone are the sketched-in details, and this is just full, regular game book art. And I think that's cool to kind of reflect this is what this is about. But if you want to just use the core rules as is, you do you. Now, one of the other interesting things in this game is that they go through the different possible skills that are available in each setting, and they talk to you as a GM about the pros and cons of using different ones, which ones to throw out, in which settings, which one to combine together, depending on the flavor and setting that you're doing. And it also, for players and GMs, under each skill description, it tells you when to use this skill, what it applies to, and what it doesn't apply to, and where to go for those other things. So you don't get those confusing skill descriptions. You're like, well, this kind of overlaps with this, or like, what does that really mean? It goes over that, which I think is really cool. So I think this game is really good. And despite the fact that I've been running Fantasy Flight Star Wars for years, and I know that system very well, and what I like about it and what I don't like about it, this game has taken the time to kind of walk you through stuff and explain things in a very easy to understand way for first-time role players or inexperienced GMs, or honestly, as a veteran, I appreciate it as well. It's well laid out, it's visually striking, it's not cluttered, and I think they give you enough room to truly build whatever you want. Now again, it's going to be better at some things than it is at others, but I think that you could easily take something like Legend of the Five Rings and slot it into a game like this. You could easily take just about any pulp setting you can think of and slot it into this. I don't know that I would do horror necessarily, just given how The game can be deadly, but it's not really that deadly. It's not gritty. If you're looking for gritty realism, this is probably not the best game system to use. But again, there are other systems that do gritty well, with a little bit of modification. Savage Worlds does gritty quite well. It's never had a generic book, but the Unis system that Eden Studios, now defunct, may they rest in peace, did for All Flesh Must Be Eaten, or Witchcraft, or I think they did Buffy as well, like a whole bunch of horror ones, is really good for gritty. Like, damage hurts in that game, and just about anybody, no matter how many hit points they have, can be taken down by an axe to the back. And so that's one to check out if you're looking for that kind of feel. I think that would be a better bet than Genesys, and a better bet than unmodified Savage Worlds. Savage Worlds can do it really well, but it needs a little bit of a tweak. So I guess really what I'm saying is I like generics. I think they're a great tool, they're a great base, they're a great starting point, but it is important to think about what the game mechanics will do to your setting and whether or not they're actually going to be a match. And it's also important to think about whether or not there's something that is close enough to your game that is setting specific that might get you there a little better without having to, add things or do too much work to make it fit. This has been very long and rambly. My apologies. But Ivan Mike made a great video and it got me thinking about a million things, and that's why I've been just thoughts, words everywhere, can't form video. Bye. Thank you.